Frank Seravalli today. No nicknames today, Frank. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good, good. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't use a nickname, but maybe next week. Okay, we're gonna get to it right away here. What do you think of the Beauvillier trade for the Canucks from their perspective?
I mean, couldn't have worked out any better. For the first time in the Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford era, the Canucks finally have some salary cap flexibility, and that's a big deal. The fact that they were able to get off of Anthony Beauvillier, I think a lot of people saw that and said, okay, so what did they give up? And no, they didn't have to pay. They actually got a little something in return. That part is got to be super exciting for Vancouver. Yes, I had seen the chat and some people liked the way that he played in the bottom six, but for commensurate to his pay, certainly wasn't producing at the level that would be required. And now the Canucks can go out and get something of value to plug in specifically to their defense core, which has been hurting, that they otherwise probably couldn't do.
Frank, I wanted to sort of follow up on this idea of what the Canucks can do now that they've got some cap space, and you alluded to the blue line. I think before there's been, and there's almost two paths the Canucks can go down. Whether it could be more of, a depth piece that's lower acquisition costs, doesn't move the needle as much. But now that they've got some flexibility, do you think it increases the odds that they perhaps take a bigger, more ambitious swing for a type of defenseman that can maybe be a bit more of a longer-term fit?
I think it definitely increases the odds. My question would be how much? Just because you have the flexibility and the wherewithal to do it, it takes two to tango. It doesn't mean that there's necessarily a team out there that's willing to trade an impact piece. And that's really the hard part to figure. I've got my first trade targets board of the season coming out on Thursday, and I'm really struggling with some names because there's so many teams that are in the mix that even if they're not true, authentic playoff teams, they at least at this juncture of the season want to see things play out and see if they could possibly, if you're St. Louis or you're Nashville, if you're one of the teams that's kind of retooling and rebuilding on the fly, why cut your legs off if you can sort of sneak into a playoff spot without having to do anything? So those teams, look at Chicago, who the Canucks just traded with again. They don't have anything left to pick at. Look at, pick another team. Like there's not much more to strip down from the Anaheim Ducks as they're trying to go in a different direction and try and be more competitive. Who are you going to trade for? Adam Henrique? That doesn't help the Canucks. So the Canucks have a want and certainly a will, but it doesn't mean that someone out there is necessarily ready to facilitate. And that's been the harder part of the equation.
Frank, Brock Besser, Connor Garland, both those guys in trade rumors. Brock, obviously more. Last year, Brock Besser's leading the NHL in goals right now. How much did it shift the focus to Beauvillier for the Canucks that Besser, one, wanted to stay, but two, that Garland is also a contributor to the team this year as well?
Yeah, I think for Beauvillier, it was kind of the guy that just stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, Garland has the term issue. You see the production from Besser and really, I think things changed for Besser when he came out at the end of last season and said he didn't want to be traded. That is the exact demarcation, the moment in time where it was like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't see that coming. And I think that changed his whole mindset in the summer. So that part has been really important. He's obviously been a huge piece to this team this year. And Garland, I think they'd love to do it. They're just not going to find a taker with that term left. That Beauvillier was the one guy that I think put them in a spot where he was the easiest guy to move at the same time to create some of that cap flexibility that they've wanted.
Frank, just big picture, outside of Vancouver, how do you think the league, executives, coaches, the industry views the Canucks' hot start? What stands out to them? Are they believers? What's the overall commentary around this perception of the team's turnaround?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of believers, certainly in the core pieces. I think everyone has watched Pettersson and Hughes and Demko and says, wow, this is the makings of a really special trio that checks the positional boxes that you need to be successful. I think they've been a little bit skeptical in terms of some of the results and the underlying numbers. And then now watching some of the injuries on defense has certainly in the last 10 days sort of changed the perception of, hey, this is a team that probably is hanging on for a little bit of time until they can find more support on their back end, because they're right back in the same spot that they were last season, which is trying to use depth defensemen to fill and play some pretty big roles. They're not alone. The Toronto Maple Leafs are in a pretty similar spot with all the injuries that they've had on their back end so far. But I think sort of universally league-wide, the Canucks are viewed as a team that could do damage, that may not be considered one of those 5, 6, or 7 true Stanley Cup authentic threats. But I think they're a team that I look at, and I think in speaking to and getting some opinion and takes from executives around the league is that they view the Canucks as a team that could be a true wild card. And I say that not in terms of a position in the standings, but one that might be able to go on a deep run.
A deep run. I love it, Frank. You're just bringing the heat today. Okay, in your opinion, you're Frank Seravalli, how far do the Canucks go in the playoffs? Because we know their start and everything they've done so far basically secures them a playoff spot, knock on wood. But how far do you think this Canucks team goes in the playoffs?
I guess tell me where they finish in the standings, present me the bracket, and I'll tell you where they go. I mean, that's really
Second
the hard
third. Second or third in the Pacific.
I mean, that's really the spot that, you're looking at. Okay, so you play the Kings in the first round right now as constituted, and you go, oh, I really like the Kings, and I like how disciplined they are with their 1-3-1, and I do think they're vulnerable in net, but that's been pretty stable so far after a rocky first week of the season. I view, depending on matchup, the Canucks as a team that could most certainly win a round and potentially more, but I don't see them knocking off the Kings or the Golden Knights in round one if they have to.
All right. That's fair. That's fair. And we'll continue to ask you this question about how far they go. Frank, you wrote about the Corey Perry situation in Chicago today over at Daily Faceoff. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's, I think, one that there's still a lot left to write, because just from a pure precedent perspective, the NHLPA hasn't decided yet whether they want to grieve this, but we haven't really seen a situation where a team has terminated a contract of a player that has not necessarily done something that's illegal, that he might have been inappropriate or improper, but not illegal. And I think there's a lot of players, agents, and frankly, even some executives from other teams today saying, well, hold on a second here. What exactly are the details? What did the Chicago Blackhawks use to be able to terminate this contract? And that part, I think, has certainly been under scrutiny. And I think we're all left asking a lot of questions because we still don't know a lot. We know that, as I reported today, alcohol was involved. We know that there were team employees and corporate partners that were around, but we don't know what Corey Perry did. We don't know who witnessed it, and we don't know who reported it. And until we learn some of those details, it's kind of hard to offer some more commentary on the validity of the Chicago Blackhawks to be able to terminate his contract. And then more than that, the next question is, okay, so where does Corey Perry go from here? This is a player who was off to a good start, on track for 50-some points this year as a 38-year-old, someone that's highly respected, someone that is a borderline Hall of Fame player with a Stanley Cup and just about every trophy that you could imagine in his trophy case, whose career and reputation has kind of been burnt to a crisp in the last week. And so you look at that and you say, okay, if we had more details, we could probably predict whether or not a team is going to take a chance on this player. And we've seen other players on other teams, whether that have had their contracts terminated, whether it's been Mike Richards, who was charged with crossing the border with, prescription medication, whether it's Evander Kane and his contract termination in San Jose. Those guys end up getting picked up in other places, and they've done stuff that may have been illegal that we don't know yet on Corey Perry. So I think it's too definitive to say, okay, just because he's 38 years old and this happened, that we know for sure that Corey Perry's career is over. I'm told there have been a couple teams that have expressed interest in the last day or two, obviously clearing waivers. That was going to happen, but there's a lot left to sift through, and we're left with more questions than answers.
That's really interesting. 38 years old. Which team would take another shot on him? It's just the immediate question that comes to mind. Like, Frank, do you have like where is there a fit for Corey Perry? Like, how many teams do you think it really is?
It was a nice try, but I'm not going to tell you which teams have poked
I'm
around.
not asking for names. I'm not asking for names.
But I can't even begin to speculate on what might be a fit, because then again, we don't know the details, and you're potentially painting a team as one that might be sympathetic to his situation. And I wouldn't want to do that either. But I would say for a player, if we're just purely talking on ice impact and performance, someone who is a pain in the arse to play against, someone who has clutch moments, someone who's won a scoring title and a Hart Trophy, and has Stanley Cup experience, Olympic gold medals. I mean, I can tell you there's a lot of teams that would like that.
All right. Good stuff as always, Frank. Thanks for joining us.
Have a good one, guys.
You as well. There he is. Frank Seravalli of Daily Faceoff. His story is up now at dailyfaceoff.com. And while you're there, check out Wendy's Daily Faceoff Survivor. Okay. Final one from Antagonist. It's our heater Canucks trade proposal of the day. Antagonist didn't give us a actual trade proposal, but I'm going to give this one to you, Harman. Do you see the Canucks targeting Brett Pesce in the offseason, or is that too big of a fish? My question with Pesce is, okay, what's he going to cost? You already got Filip Hronek. You already got Elias Pettersson. Pesce needs a new contract.
Yeah, I like Pesce a lot as a player. One thing that has been interesting about Pesce, because I did a piece last year looking at, some of the top defensive defensemen, and I was breaking down video and just having a conversation with another executive, sort of, who essentially brought up the idea that Pesce's a fantastic player, but is he the type? The point was that he may not look as good in a different environment as he would in Carolina. And that he's not quite a driver on his own, even though he has a lot of appealing attributes. And his point was that you may not justify the cost it takes to acquire him. I don't know how much I believe that or not, but you'd have to do a lot of digging on that, because
almost especially like Jalen Chatfield.
Yeah, also just for defensemen in general, you always have to think about, like, fit makes such a huge difference. I mean, you're seeing it with OEL even, right? Of course, his situation, I'm sure the full offseason of recovery helps after, I believe, his performance last season was hindered by the broken foot he sustained at the IIHF World Championships. But going to Florida, he went from borderline unplayable, not one of the Canucks' top 6 defensemen, arguably, to top pair right side minutes in Florida. And the Panthers had a strong winning record without Ekblad and Montour. But yeah, I mean, Pesce's the type of player that if you're serious about taking the next step, it has to be, I think, a bigger, like, you need a high-end defenseman is the point I'm trying to make to take that next step to contender status. Whether it's him, whether it's Brady Shea's also a pending UFA, although he's a lefty. Gustav Forsling in Florida is interesting, where I'm looking at the Panthers and Reinhart is a pending free agent, and he's been lighting the league on fire goals-wise. They've also got Montour, who's in need of a significant raise. Forsling, who's a pending UFA, in need of a significant raise. I don't know if they have the cap space to accommodate and keep all those guys. And Forsling's been, I mean, outstanding in the Panthers as they're all situations top pair defensemen. So the point I'm trying to make is, as we discuss the Canucks' next step, I really would like to see them find a way to land an actual needle mover, not just a Zadorov. Like, if you find a Zadorov type, yeah, he'll upgrade your blue line, but that's not going to elevate you from playoff team to contender status.
Okay.
That's not going to be a big enough sort of upgrade. So you're just going to have to be cognizant of acquisition cost and contract. That's always the hard part, right? Because there's so many players around the league you love, but then you come down to the actual, not just window shopping, but okay, this is what you have to pay. And you're like, ooh, I don't love this player as much as I thought I did.
Karan in the chat said the only way we get Pesci in the offseason is if PD and Hronek take big discounts. We don't expect to happen. So we'll see. Maybe a deep playoff run. Maybe a deep playoff run. They take less. I don't know.
I mean,
Maybe
the
not
more
PD.
realistic scenario is probably that you hope to get off of, let's say, Garland's contract
Sure.
and allocate that money to upgrade the blue line. I'm not banking on Pettersson and Hronek taking discounts.
Yeah.
And I think if they do go on a playoff run, they're going to get even more because there's a good chance that the reason why they're going that far is because Pettersson and Hronek are exceeding expectations.
Maybe nails them on. Nails them on.
Hey, how
leads
about
them.
this one? If Corey Perry doesn't do whatever he did, Anthony Beauvillier is probably still a Vancouver Canuck.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. I mean, almost not even probably. Basically,
yeah. I mean, they had the
certainly.
Hall injury, right?
Yeah.
And so they did need to add someone to play with Bedard, but that was just kind of the cherry on top at the end of it.
But now they needed to add Beauvillier. They needed to add a guy. So yeah, it's a great point, Grady. It's a very good point. Canucks conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.